All right, welcome, folks. Thanks for coming to our student brown bag. It's homecoming, so I see some faces in the back that are not student faces. That's excellent. So today our brown bag will be presented by not one, but three excellent students here. We have Annika, Nathaniel, and Emily who will be talking to us about some progress that they've been making on their honors thesis projects. And they're all working on different but related things. So hopefully they will enlighten you about some very exciting rocks. So I'm going to pass it on to them. And please help me welcome them.
Hi, everybody. As Clem introduced us, I'm Annika.
I'm Nathaniel.
And we are trying to piece together the Piedmont puzzle, and we all have our respective rocks. Nathaniel's focusing on the kyanite, me, the slate and adjacent rocks, and Emily, the Garbenschiefer.
All right, so we've mentioned that we're talking about the Piedmont. The Piedmont is a very complicated area, geologically speaking. It's somewhat difficult to study, which makes it kind of exciting for us. Outcrop is actually very hard to get in the Piedmont sometimes. It's wait. Oh. All right, great. Outcrop is somewhat rare in the Piedmont due to intense chemical weathering of the area. Most of the bedrock is covered in topsoil and saprolite, which is just decomposed bedrock. The Piedmont is largely composed of what are called terrains. That's basically a way of saying it's a block of crust that's been sutured onto the North American continent from somewhere else. This terrain that we are interested in for our project is called the Chapawamzik terrain. It's a suspect terrain, which means we're not entirely sure where it comes from. The Chapawamzik terrain began its life as an volcanic island arc. Think like the modern day Aleutians in Alaska. So you'd have like mostly volcanic and volcaniclastic rocks that during the Ordovician period were accreted onto North America, and later during the Alleghanian orogeny that built the Appalachian Mountains, they were metamorphosed. Like the Piedmont, the Chapawamzik is a complicated terrain. Mostly it's made up of three main areas. The Chapawamzik Formation is a suite of metavolcanic rocks. There's a number of plutons that are in the area, number of successor basins, which Annika will be talking about, including the Arvonia, Quantico, and Bouffard formations. And there's a number of Mesozoic rocks, diabase dikes, and some sedimentary basins.
Great. So here's a regional map adapted from Owens. Shout out in the back. And this blue box is highlighting the region that we're most interested in for all of our projects. Okay. And so the Piedmont is made up of many different orogenies, and we're just going to give a brief overview, starting with the Grenvillian orogeny about 1 billion years ago. And this is associated with Rodinia, which is the supercontinent before Pangaea, much before Pangaea. And the first main orogeny here in North America in the Piedmont is the Taconian orogeny. And this happened when the Chapawamzik terrain accreted onto North America. And the Chapawamzik terrain has actually been dated to 470 MA, which is around the early Ordovician time period. And there are also some plutons that have been dated from this time period as well that are associated with the Taconian orogeny. And next we have the Akkadian orogeny, and there's also a Neo-Akkadian aspect. This is more of the Devonian time period, and this happened when there was more continental crust colliding with Laurentia, including the continent Avalonia. And lastly, we have the Alleghanian orogeny. That's the latest orogeny, which is responsible for today's Appalachian Mountains. This is where we get the assembly of Pangaea and the metamorphism of the Piedmont. And during this metamorphism, the metamorphic rocks, such as green schist, went into the amphibolite facies. Okay. And here's some of our unresolved questions. Anyone want to read their respective?
Yeah, so these questions just like generally relate to all three of our projects regarding the Chapawamzik terrain, like what are pressure and temperature conditions that these rocks experienced, And when did this metamorphism occur? And also, as Nathaniel touched on, like, what is the origin of Chalcolomstic terrain? Like, literature agrees it's a volcanic arc, but exactly like where did that arc come from? And also, Annika will touch on a little later about her project, about the successor basins. When were they deposited? They're sedimentary rocks deposited after an orogeny, but which orogeny?
Okay. And now Nathaniel is going to give his spiel.
All right, yeah, so we've spoken about the Piedmont and the Chalcolomstic in broad strokes. Now let's zoom in on my project, which is an issue which has been causing geologists headaches for a long time. My oldest source for this is like 1913, so it's been there for a while. All right, so my project studies an enigmatic group of rocks called kyanite quartzites and kyanite schists, what's been known as the Virginia Kyanite Belt. They're odd rocks because their composition is almost entirely silica and alumina, which is not really something you see in many continental rocks. It's long been thought that these rocks had a sedimentary origin, or protolith, think like a clayey sandstone. More recent research has shown that that is very unlikely, and that they were likely volcanic rocks that were then subjected to hydrothermal alteration, and are therefore part of the Chalcolomstic Formation. The protolith of these rocks was most likely a volcanic rock, depending on, there's the rocks that are making their way around now. The blue kyanite quartzites probably had more of a basaltic composition, and the one with the white gray kyanite was more of like an intermediate andesitic composition. So these rocks probably would have been part of the Chalcolomstic Formation before they were altered in a high sulfidation environment. So very acidic fluids, think like 1 to 3, a pH of 1 to 3, and temperatures of like anywhere between 100 and 400 degrees Celsius. They were then metamorphosed to amphibolite facies. So my goals with this project were to investigate the metamorphic conditions that these rocks were subjected to, that they enjoyed, to acquire absolute dates for both the metamorphism and the hydrothermal alteration of these rocks, and to investigate the crystallization history of the kyanite with using cathodoluminescence imagery, which is a technique that lets you see, like, kind of look inside the mineralogy of the rocks and see otherwise invisible textures within them. My questions were, what conditions did they reach? Are there metamorphic conditions within the Chalcolomstic kyanite quartzites that are different along different textural domains or different outcrops? Yeah, and see if I can date the crystallization and the regional metamorphism. All right, so my methods, fieldwork, I did 2 field trips and a visit to the Virginia Kyanite mine. One thing I discovered was that apparently I have very tasty blood because the ticks were all over me for that. So sampled a number of kyanite quartzite outcrops and also took kyanite quartzite thin sections from previous theses. Then for the petrology section, I cut rocks and sent them off to be made into thin sections and studied them. On the center, that is a thin section of a kyanite schist from David Spears' property. The kyanite is the central, like the very large blocky minerals. And then that's under plane polarized light. On our right here is a cross polarized light image of kyanite quartzite. The kyanite is that kind of yellowish orange mineral there. Finally, I did a trip to the University of Minnesota. They have a lot of money in their department, so they have a very fun electron microprobe that I was able to use to do zirconium and rutile geothermometry and titanium and quartz geothermometry. I also got cathodoluminescence imaging on those samples. Also, they have a flock of resident turkeys that apparently is a terror to the students there, so that's always fun. All right, so my preliminary results. With the zirconium and rutile geothermometer, I found basically exactly what was expected. Amphibolite facies temperatures ranging between 600 and 635 degrees Celsius. An interesting trend that we found with that was that as you go southwest along the Chalcolomstic terrain, you have progressively higher temperatures. Additionally, there are some textural differences in temperatures. Zirconium or rutile that was included within the kyanite recorded a consistently lower temperature than rutile that was included within the quartz matrix. So that's likely preserving part of the prograde pressure temperature path, either decreasing pressure or the rock just moves and gets hotter over time. For titanium and quartz geothermometry, we were able to use a technique where you can plot the zirconium and rutile isopleth, which is basically just a line on a graph, and compare that to the isopleth for titanium and quartz. If you're looking at it, the pressures that we got were between 10 and 25 kilobars. That might not mean much to folks, but that is significantly higher than expected. That would be like subduction zone conditions. So, unless I've discovered a new subduction zone, I think that that's very unlikely that it actually reached that temperature or those pressure conditions. Likely, what happened with that is that not all of the quartz grains were fully equilibrated. So I'm doing a lot of data processing now to try and see if I can resolve that and use only the data points from quartz grains that did equilibrate. So, this is preliminary right now. All right, so for cathodoluminescence imaging, interesting things about the kyanite quartzites that have been making their way around. Some of them have a blue, like a dark blue-green kyanite, and some have like a white kyanite. That's mostly due to this mineral or trace element inclusions within the kyanite. And we were able to look at that with cathodoluminescence. It is a microscopic technique or microscopy technique where you can see internal growth structures within the kyanite. We documented several novel growth structures. If you look over on the one to the far left, there's kind of that banding formation with the white and dark bands are alternating. That's called oscillatory zoning. That's very indicative of relatively rapidly changing environments as the kyanite grows. So that would likely show that there was at least two different periods of crystallization for some of those kyanites. Others, if you look further towards the Little Willis River kyanite quartzite, that really doesn't show very much core rim zoning, which means that kyanite probably grew in more in one in one batch kind of. So that can teach us a lot about the just the growth history and the alteration history of the kyanite quartzites. And then there's pictures of some of the samples that are making their way around now. So there's also next steps. So we're going to look more at the titanium and quartz data and try and resolve that, get more useful, more reasonable pressure and temperature or pressure values for that. We're going to do more thin section analyses. We recently got some more thin sections in, yay. We're also going to look at trace element abundances within the kyanite quartzites. We're going to apply that with the cathodoluminescence images to try and get at more of the growth conditions within the kyanite quartzites. Also, there's zircons in these rocks and rutile, both of which we can date. So here are some cathodoluminescence imaging of the zircons. The scale bars here show 10 microns, so they're very tiny, but we can still probably date these. So we're going to try and get both the igneous crystallization age, which probably will represent the core, the dark core there, and the metamorphic alteration date is the brighter rim of those zircons. There's also rutile in many of these rocks, so we can hopefully do a similar technique there. Finally, there are some kyanite schist samples that we collected. Those would have had a different protolith likely, and they have more minerals in them. So we can use what's called a pseudo-section analysis to try and get at looking at, okay, we have these kind of minerals in this rock. We're going to look at that and then see the range of possible pressure and temperature conditions that could have formed that rock. So yeah, that's my project. All right.
Okay, now we're going to switch over and I'm going to talk about my project. I studied Garbenschiefer, which is a sample passed around that had those really pretty cut faces on it. And so Garbenschiefer shown here in the background of the slide. As an example of one of my stops that I visited is a metamorphic rock. It's an amphibolite that's characterized by these large radiating amphiboles among a matrix that's much finer. That includes like quartz, plagioclase, and some of the outcrops also had garnets, such as this one. So there's like several different goals for my project. So far, I've been able to look through the Dillwyn and Pendleton quadrangle maps to look for large-scale regional features such as like faults and folds such as anticlines. And also I noted evidence of deformation on outcrop scale if I was able to see any. And then back in the lab, I've been trying to quantify microscopic fabric of amphibole, so I can combine that and compare that to macroscopic fabric that is able to measure like foliation, lineation out in the field. And final goal I've not worked towards yet, but hopefully I will be able to understand the metamorphic conditions that the garden sheaf experience, including like pressure and temperature. So several questions I'm trying to answer to work towards those goals. Just like what causes the garden sheaf texture to form? It's, really unique looking, and, why is some rocks like look just like more lineated and some rocks look more randomly and that like radiating texture. And also like, is this correlated? What is this correlated with? Like pressure, temperature conditions, proximity to like regional deformation features. And also like, did these rocks experience the same metamorphic conditions? So far I've completed like 3 main methods. I did field work over the summer with Nathaniel, and we went out and visited outcrops. At those outcrops, I visited 12 outcrops and sampled 12 oriented samples, or 12 outcrops, 7 oriented samples. You can see here in the picture, attempting to remove a sample from the outcrop, and I noted like mineralogy, took like foliation lineation measurements, noted like any folding or other like features in the rocks. And then I got an opportunity to go to University of Texas at Austin to do X-ray computed tomography. And you can see like I'm here in the lab and I'm attempting to segment out oxides from my sample, and XRCT allowed me to see the 3D shape of the mineral grains by looking at density differences, because the different minerals all have like different densities, so I was able to segment them out. And then lastly, I was able to do anisotropy and magnetic acceptability using this Kappa bridge that's located here in the geology department. And that allowed me to get an idea of what I hope the crystallographic orientation of amphibole in the sample, and amphiboles are like paramagnetic minerals. So if you have ferromagnetic minerals in there, that's going to override the signal. And unfortunately for 2 of my samples, that is the case. And so far I've analyzed 3 of my samples, and I've shown pictures of the outcrop here. And so some takeaways that I have so far is garden schiefer texture varies. Like on the left, we have, it just kind of looks like just the matrix, and then the radiating amphiboles. In the center, there's some banding, but it looks like folded and deformed. And on the right, there's compositional banding, but you see less of this like deformation and folding. In addition, all these outcrops, when I plot them on the geologic map, are indeed on limbs of anticline, which the literature suggested. So it's good that we're in agreement there. And then these 2 outcrops on the right, unfortunately, did contain ferromagnetic minerals. When we ran AMS, the results were not as expected for amphibole. So we know there's definitely some magnetite. And when we were out in the field, that middle outcrop responded to a hand magnet. So that was bad news there. And then the outcrop on the right, when I looked at thin section, over on the photo on the left, it's reflected light. And that's a picture of what I think is an ilmenite grain with magnetite X solution. So magnetite's a little bit hidden in there, but unfortunately is also there. And then also additionally, amphiboles are generally within the plane of foliation. So for the sample that did work because it didn't have ferromagnetic minerals is sample 3, which was that like randomly looking amphiboles outcrop from the last slide. And we found that as expected, K3, which is like the minimum magnetic susceptibility direction, was plotted in the center of the staring net, while the maximum susceptibility direction was plotted towards the outside. And the way the samples were oriented was that foliation was near horizontal and lineation was oriented parallel to the x-axis. So this makes sense, and that shows that this method is working as long as you don't have samples that are covering up the signal of amphiboles. Okay, so this next slide is showing a little bit of my workflow and progress through my XRCT data analysis. So I start out, I have the outcrops there, and those were cut into cubes. I had 2 cubes for these 3 outcrops. And these cubes were scanned and produced a 3D XRCT image, which it's like a black and white image that highlights those density differences. So the more dense a mineral is, like such as the oxides, the brighter they are, and the matrix is shown as darkest because they have the least density. And then I was able to do contour mesh using Dragonfly software to display the location of the minerals inside these samples. So I have garnet if it was present, and then the oxides. And then at the top, the reason why that one's kind of like floating in the middle between the two is because in that outcrop, like I saw garnet out in the field, but then when I went to look at the XRCT image, I could not determine like were they oxides, were there garnets, they're more finer grain, could not see a difference. And I'm thinking in the particular cube that was cut from that sample, there was no garnets, but that's why that one's kind of out in the center up there. And then lastly, I was able to do fabric analysis using Quant3D to build these 3D rose diagrams to show the amphibole fabric. And you can clearly see like the top 2 samples preferred like directionality to it. And these were the samples that were able to actually like measure lineation, while the sample on the bottom kind of looks like while it's all within a plane, it's not generally like in a particular direction. There's also like going out to the sides, which makes sense because looking at the outcrop, the amphiboles look more like randomly radiating as a typical Barbenschiefer texture. So next steps, reorient the samples that were not able to orient in foliation context, and also apply the real world orientation of these samples when I run like AMS and XRCT data, because you can put that like in the software when you run it. Cut more cubes. I have 4 more samples that I can cut cubes for, and collect AMS data on other samples. I also have thin sections of each of the 3 outcrops analyzed so far up here, and I hope to look at those in more detail. I have not done that yet. Electron microprobe analysis to understand pressure and temperature conditions. And for the samples that did not work for AMS, determining what the oxides are by doing like high and low temperature measurements using the Kappa bridge. And then hopefully also collect high field AMS data on those samples to be able to subtract out the signal from the ferromagnetic minerals to only get the signal from amphiboles.
So now we're going to move on to the successor basins part of the talk, and I'm going to get a stick because I have a lot of maps I don't need to point to. So, here's the region where we're interested in, and here's that Owens map again. This is like the place where we get Chapawamzik and the successor basins in contact. And I should probably define what a successor basin is. So a successor basin is where you have sediment deposited after an orogeny. It's kind of like a foreland basin, except a foreland basin happens during an orogeny when you have like subsidence and space for sediment to fill up. So successor basin means after the orogeny. And so part of my project is finding out which orogeny successor basin. And so the main units that we're interested in are the Bouffards and the Arvonia, and this is Brown's map from 1969. And then the Arvonia is in this dark pink, light pink mix, all the way over here. And then Bouffards is in the middle. So this whole region is in a syncline, and there's been a lot of debate, which I'll get to in a second. So here I've labeled our main stops and where we've done sampling and measurements. And this is just so you can get a feel of the area. To the right here, or the east, we have the Chapawamsik terrain. And also on the west, they're in different colors because they're different parts of what Brown calls the Hatcher complex, but that's now known as Chapawamsik terrain. So what's up with this basin? So the Arvonia and Bouffards formations are both metasedimentary rocks. The Bouffards is a muscovite chlorite conglomeratic schist. And I've passed out 2 samples of those. They have, you can see, possible mud clasts in it. They're stretched out a lot. They're very deformed. And there's also, like, it's very shiny. So if you've seen that hand sample, like a lineation and a foliation as well. And the Arvonia formation is a little bit more flavorful. It has a slate, which is very commercially useful. So for example, there's many slate mines in the area. We also have a quartzite, the Bremo member of the Arvonia formation. It's a lot different than the slate. It's coarser, sandy. And we also have, sorry, blinking. Oh yes, okay. We have more of a porphyroblastic schist in the Arvonia as well. And so here is a photo of the Arvonia. While most of it is very nice, smooth slate, kind of like this chalkboard, we do have some primary structures inside. So these are some brachiopods, and they're very deformed, but you can see clearly that they're shells. So these shells, sorry guys, very deformed. And so based on the fossils, people in the past have said that these are late Ordovician aged fossils. However, it's really hard to tell based on only fossil assemblage because of the extreme deformation and metamorphism in this area. And so in this area, fun fact, this slate is used on the William and Mary campus roofs. Anyway, so into my project, there's been disagreement in the literature, which we'll get to here. And back here, we want to know whether the Bouffards or Arvonia formation is older. So in Stows and Stows from 1948, they're saying that the structure is, it's a syncline, but it's a refolded fold. And so it's more of an anticline. And in that model, we have an older Bouffards formation. In fact, they don't even think that the Bouffards is its own formation. They think it's the base of the Arvonia. And then we go on to Evans and Marr, who agree with Stows and Stows, and they come along in 1988. And they also say that the Bouffards is older than the Arvonia, but they do kind of acknowledge that the Bouffards is its own formation. And all of them basically have Chapawamsik as the oldest layer. And then Brown comes along in 1969, and he decides that the Bouffards formation is younger than the Arvonia based on facing indicators. And facing indicators are structures in the rock that tell you which layer is older. So if the cleavage is steeper than the bedding, it's right side up, which can tell us that the top layer is in fact on top. And Brown found that the Bouffards was on top. And then later we have our very own Chuck Bailey and Hughes from 2014 agreeing with Brown. And so we have this back and forth in the literature, and we really want to figure out the truth. The most modern takes that we have are based on detrital zircon data, which we didn't have like 30, 40 years ago. And the detrital zircon from these papers suggest a much younger than late Ordovician depositional age. Okay, so the main questions of my project are, what is the maximum depositional age of the Arvonia and Bouffards formation? And for those of you who aren't familiar with detrital zircons, zircon is an accessory mineral within rocks, and the closure temperature is about 900 degrees Celsius. So that's when the system closes, and then we can start measuring the decay of uranium to lead. And so a detrital zircon is a zircon that came from a rock, like an igneous rock, and then it got deposited in the sand. And your rock can only be as old as the youngest grain. So this will tell us which orogeny our successor basin comes after. And then next we want to measure the structures, and we want to figure out what these structures tell us about the region, what the depositional environment was, and tell us about the paleo environment. And then lastly, we want to know the pressure, time, temperature, path of these rocks. This is more of the petrology part of my project. And so for methods, we did a lot of field work this summer and last summer. This is the quarry in Arvonia where best slate in the world comes from. And then we also have geochronology methods. This was at University of Texas, Austin. Emily was there on this trip, and that's Caroline for scale. That is a water table where we separate sand into different densities. And so the zircons are going to be very dense. And so that water table shakes, and then it gives us the good stuff. And then we also have a petrology aspect to my methods. So I've cut up a bunch of billets on the saw downstairs and then sent them off to the lab and gotten thin sections. And we're looking at the minerals and the fabric and what that tells us about how these rocks were deformed. And then also working on the sense of shear, sense of motion. And by the way, this rock on the bottom, this is from Volcano Lane in the Bouffards Formation. And then this rock on the top is from the Arvonia Formation. It's more of that schisty quartzite. Okay, and here's one of the maps that we have so far. This is in New Canton. It's the northeast section of Brown's 1969 quadrangle. Yellow is alluvium, quaternary age, and then we have our rocks. So from youngest to oldest, there's really only two main parts. We have our Devonian philitic schists and quartzites, and then we have our Chapawamsip, which is Ordovician. And this is slightly different from Brown's because back when Brown made his map in 1969, they didn't name these formations as the Chapawamsip yet. And then we've also split up this whole section. It's labeled as one rock type on Brown's map, but we divided it into more higher resolution parts. So we have philitic schist here. Right. And it's kind of hard to see with the structures. Sorry, I didn't make it bigger, but this is all in an overall syncline. All right, and some more work we've done on this region in New Canton is looking at the crossbeds. And so most of the regions, like here in the schisty quartzites, they have less primary structures visible. But here, where we have a coarser sand, we can see actual crossbeds, which is pretty unique for a metamorphic rock unit. And so we've measured crossbeds and a main bed, and we've plotted them on a stereo net. And then what we did is rotated all of these crossbeds like with respect to like the main bed, like I believe it's that one. And then we can rotate it to normal because these rocks have a bedding that's pretty near vertical. And when we rotate them back to horizontal, we can tell what direction the sediment transport is. So based on this stereo net, the sediment transport is to the northwest. Okay, now for a little geochronology spotlight. We had a mineral separation, and then that leads into computer work and the mass spec. So for the mineral separation, we had the big table called the Gemini. That was a few slides over, but there's also a baby table. This one doesn't really preserve the apatites and mostly just preserves zircons. Apatites are another accessory mineral with a lower closure temperature, around 350 to 400 C, but it's a lot easier to use the baby table. So we use that for many zircons. And then after that, they dry up and then we separate it with bromoform. It's kind of a dense liquid. So the good minerals float, bad minerals float to the top. The good stuff that we want, zircons, apatites, go to the bottom. And then there's several liquid separations like this, and we separate it magnetically using the fronds. And then finally, we dry it up and then pick out the zircons. Thank you to Dr. Lisa Stockley for helping us pick out all these nice zircons. And then we put them under the machine and we pick out on the computer where we want to zap the zircons. And we zap it with a laser, and then that causes gases to emit off it, and then it goes into the mass spec, and they measure how much uranium, how much lead is in it, and that will give us our age. And so here are just some places in the stratigraphy we sampled. We wanted to get a good breadth, like bottom to top. And we do have some results. Actually, Chuck came back from Texas this week, and we do have more results. But this is just one that I've plotted so far. we have a histogram of the Bremo quartzite. So this is that sandy stuff we did the rotating crossbed stuff in. And we found that the youngest zircon, I don't know, I didn't write it up here, but it's like 407 or something. It's Devonian. And you can see based on this histogram, the population, whether they're from like the Grenvillian age or Akkadian. And then I separated the youngest 13 zircons, which are under 700 MA. And you can see like, this is all definitely after Taconian age. And so what's next for our project is to do more of that petrology stuff that Nathaniel and Emily were talking about. We're going to do that pseudosection analysis, which requires georock chemistry. So we're probably going to send out more rock samples for that. And Owens also has data from about 13 years ago that we can reuse. And we'll just, we'll plot it on something like this to see what temperature and pressure is most favorable for that assemblage of minerals. And then lastly, we're making another large regional map, bigger than the one I showed you. It's a little daunting, but we'll get to it. And another update that I didn't put in here because this is fresh data off the press. Chuck said that based on the zircons from the Arvonia and Bouffards, the Arvonia formation has a Grenvillian population of like 50% and the Bouffards is like 20%. So that tells us that the Arvonia has more old sediments than the Bouffards. So that kind of tells us that, along with our structural data, tells us that the Arvonia is probably in fact older and the Bouffards is younger. Thank you, everyone. That's pretty much it. Here are some people we'd love to acknowledge. Without this crew of people, Chuck, Clem, Tyler Sauer, you guys probably don't know these people, but they're important to us. This wouldn't be able to be done. So thank you. Questions? Yeah.
Is there an outcrop where you can see the contact between the Arvonia and the Chapalonsa?
Yeah, actually, so if I go back to this, Brown had his contact a little bit more to the east, I believe, but we found, so if you mean contact where you see the rocks touching, we haven't found one so far, but we have seen like Arvonia in that spot and then Chapawamsik like 10, 15 feet away. And so there's some parts in the railroad track that kind of crop out. And there's some gaps in the outcrop, but we do see Arvonia, 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 and then, oh wow, this is like something different. This is Chapawamsik. And we've also seen that farther west along the Slate River, which is off of the James. I should have labeled the James. So
is there anything in the base of the Arvonia that tells you you're getting near the base of the Arvonia? Near the contact, does it get closer? Do you see ups or anything in it?
So I don't have that part of the map of my own, but I do have in Browns. Okay. So we sampled around there along the Slate River, which is like right at the contact of Arvonia and Chapawamsik, and we have sampled that part that we think is the base of the Arvonia. And it was very interesting. It was very green and it was a bit coarser, but I think the thing that stood out to me the most about that part was it was very green and it was like a quartzite Arvonia type. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so we're not going to be able to do the traditional method. So traditionally how you do it, like, you have like your zircon on a thin section and you have like the dark core and you have like the rim and you can get like a spot like, in the rim and in the core. It's probably too small to do that. What we're going to be doing, hopefully, is if we can separate out enough zircons, we can, and then like mount them. We can basically take like a profile type deal. So you have like the zircons, this is like the top of the zircon, like looking at it, and you have like the very thin rim here. And if you like shoot the laser down, the first population that you get will hopefully be like the rim population, which can, and then like as you kind of like, it's like you're drilling down into it. So you can get like the first little bit will be the metamorphosed rim, and the inside will be like the original crystallization date of the protolith. Hopefully. They are very small.
Another question I have for you, Nathaniel, is you talked about how there's like two different colors of your kyanite. Do those colors like correlate with like different areas of your map? Like are all the blue ones in the south and the white ones in the north, or is it kind of dispersed throughout?
Yeah, that was actually interesting. So we found one of them. One of my samples up. Can I borrow the stick, please? So this guy up here was from David Spears' property. That one actually is the dark blue kyanite, which we didn't know was up there yet. Previously, we've known about dark blue stuff around Baker Mountain and Madisonville. So it's exciting to see that there's more stuff up there. The reason that there's probably that bluer kyanite versus the more colorless type you see around Willis Mountain and the interior over here is you have like higher amounts of iron and especially chromium in the blue kyanite, which probably relates to the protolith. So probably the blue kyanite would have had like more of a mafic, like a basalt protolith, and like the white kyanite would have been like more andesitic, like an intermediate composition.
So for carbon cheaper, have you trained your text document to recognize it so you don't have to type it out? And make sure the spelling is correct?
I have not, it still marks it wrong every single time, so I need to add that to my personal dictionary, definitely.
Do you have any more questions for this trio?
For Annika, I just want to ask you, in your expert opinion, do you believe that the debate about the ages of the Arvonia and Buffers formations, is that like, would you say that's settled? Or
Pretty much. I mean, it's honestly been settled for the past few years, maybe even since 2008, when Chuck did trial zircons on it and found a 391. But even before we went to Texas and did the geochronology, we saw facing indicators in the Arvonia that showed cleavage steeper than bedding. And like Arvonia is here, Bufars is here, this is right way up. We know like which rock is on top, and that was Bufars. So yeah.
Just thought of a garbage cheaper question, because I'm about to teach next week in 101 about relative aging, and something I think you noticed, and I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it seems like the like non-deformed like radiating one, and then there's like a slightly more deformed and then like a slightly more deformed one. Is that like do you think that's like a sequence of deformation, or are they just all kind of originating independent of like a sequence of like this is the oldest and that's the youngest, or is it cheaper?
I'm thinking like, so spatially, the radiating one was like the furthest west, and then slightly east of that, like in similar geographic area, I'd say like within like a mile or two of each other, was the one that had the compositional banding, but we didn't really see all like the folds and the other things we saw in that other outcrop, like the most deformed outcrop, we had to drive, and it was like northeast quite a ways. So I'm thinking like they're all Chapawamsic, similar ages, but perhaps like the deformation or the metamorphic conditions like temperature and pressure was not the same throughout like the whole Chapawamsic. So I'm thinking maybe that has something to do with the textural differences.
So more or less like it all happened during the same time, but the pressure, temperature conditions were different in different areas.
That's something like spatially how they're oriented. That's fine.
Makes sense.
Okay, well, let's thank them again. As a reminder, tomorrow in the Rock Garden, 10 to noon, we'll be gathering as a community for homecoming. There'll be alums, there'll be students, so please come. There'll also be snacks and beverages.
Yeah, bring friends.
Yeah, bring friends.
It's gonna be fun.
We'll also be talking about the new rocks in the Rock Garden. So if you want to hear all about those,
They're gonna be unveiled.
you should definitely come.
Good job, guys. You guys killed it.
Oops, sorry. Thank you, folks that were online.
It's fine. It's fine. We got through it.
We got it. Stick is nice.
Oh, guys, we have some friends.
Hey, oh my God, guys.
Oh my
How y'all
gosh.
doing?
hello.
Hey, you guys!
Thanks for
Great
coming.
presentation.
Yeah, I had to show up. I kept missing these brown bags. I got so mad.
Wait,
I'm gonna be there tomorrow too. I'm driving all the way down
All
there.
right. We'll see you tomorrow. Milo, are you coming tomorrow?
No, unfortunately, I have class.
oh my gosh, on a Saturday.
Yeah, no, I'm in my whole like reflected light class. So I'm finally actually doing some of the stuff y'all are doing. Very jealous.
Wow.
Yeah, Annika, you already had the chance to do LAIC-PMS. Use it up, baby.
Yeah.
You'll get to the like I'm finally doing that in grad school. So congrats. Like it's really awesome stuff, isn't it?
Love William and Mary. Yeah, it was.
Ah,
I'm on cloud 9 about it.
there you go. There you go. Great presentation, you guys. It was really interesting.
All right, I was like, ooh, Chapawamzik. I didn't even know about the Chapawamzik.
Zooming in, guys.
Yeah, I got in the fact I was like cathodoluminescence. Okay, we're really hitting the bounds out of the park.
Ooh, the geobarometry and the geothermometers. Okay.
Oh yeah.
There you go.
Hi.
Hi. Hi, girly.
Hi, are you, Milo, are you coming tomorrow?
No, I have class.
Sad.
Nyla, I will see you
So
by like
sad.
9 a.m.
I will be driving down there immediately.
Wait, where are you, Milo?
I'm in Colorado right now.
Oh yeah, I saw it on your LinkedIn.
Oh, you did you? Yeah, no, I'm crazy. They literally were like, why don't you go in like a mineralogy lab at like 9 a.m. to identify minerals? I'm like, I don't want to do that, but here we are.
don't want to do that, but yeah, no, I felt that. It's good to see you, Pookie. Bye.
Oh, it's great to see you too, babe.
We'll let y'all go.
Yeah,
will see
we'll
y'all
let you guys go.
tomorrow.
We'll chat it up.
Bye, y'all.
Hi, Emily. Oh, my.
Great job.
Let Clem end the
Yeah.
Zoom. I don't know how to. I don't want to mess it up.
Oh, okay. Oh my, Nyla, how
Actually,
you
Milo,
doing?
I texted you to reply to my text.
I know. I need to reply.
Okay.
I know. How have you been?
I have been. I've been.
That's good.
Hi
Hi,
Bye, Clem.
I'm gonna end the Zoom, so you're gonna.
That's
Clem.
fine.
Okay, we'll chat another time.
Yeah.
Bye. See you tomorrow.
Bye.
Yeah.